quit school when I was 8 years old and have never looked back since.
This is Sierra Allen. And you might have a hard time making sense of her story at first, because most people think you're not supposed to quit school as a third grader, let alone look back after 20 years and still see that as the right decision. But this isn't the story of some rebellious 8-year-old who just made a terrible choice but managed to turn out okay in spite of it all. No, there's actually a broader philosophy behind Sierra's approach to learning. And I want to show you my conversation with Sierra as a way of introducing you to this way of thinking that took what could have been a disastrous choice for Sierra and turned it into a decision that she stands by to this day. You see, Sierra is not a dropout, she's an unschooler. Now you might be wondering, what is unschooling?
Unschooling is this idea of like kind of taking ownership over your own path of learning and really making your own choices and decisions when it comes to your own education.
That might sound pretty bold to let young kids be completely in charge of their own education. Like, who's gonna teach them? Unschooling can be a tough thing to wrap your head around, but one of the first things to understand about unschoolers is that they think learning doesn't require teaching. And so, they tend to see school as we know it as largely unnecessary. What does learning look like when it's not the result of teaching?
I mean, it looks like life. Just like doing what you want and finding out that you need to learn something to get to where you want, and then figuring out ways of doing that.
Think about how adults learn after we leave school. Now, sometimes it does resemble the formal study we did when we were students, but mostly we just live life, strive for things, make mistakes, and learn from experience. So why can't kids learn the same way? Well, according to unschoolers, they can, and they can figure out what's important to learn just by being good observers of the world around them. Maybe kids don't even need to go to school in order to learn how to learn. Now, this might be easier to take in if you're willing to expand your idea of what counts as learning.
I also really think that learning happens through relationship and not just relationship with other humans, but also relationship with your environment, with your hobby, with your passion, with your dog, with your neighbor. I see learning as this kind of like beautiful, even like maybe sacred concept, kind of like how, you know, like laughter is like this special, like human thing, right? There's these things in life that are just like magical, and I think learning is one of those things. You can't put it in a box and it just like shows up. And sometimes you don't even realize you're learning. I think it's almost a mistake to name it, because then we put it in a box, right? We think like, oh, I'm learning now, I'm not learning now. But if you're alive, you're learning. If you care about stuff and if you're in relationship with stuff, you're learning.
Yeah, that sounds nice and all, but can this actually work? Like, can academic skills emerge from such a loosey-goosey approach? Take reading, for instance. Teachers spend years honing the craft of teaching how to read. Can we really count on it just happening spontaneously?
To take reading, for example, like I didn't really know this. I learned to read super young. My parents just like read to me when I was like 4, and then I learned. But I have friends who were unschooled, whose parents never, sat down and taught them how to read. Ever. And some of them didn't learn how to read until like they were 12.
12 years old.
Yeah.
Let's pause here. I want you to take a moment to imagine a 12-year-old who doesn't know how to read. Normally in a school context, this is a bad sign. We could pretty safely say that such a student probably has a bad attitude about reading. Maybe they have some kind of processing difficulty, but certainly they're way behind and it's going to be really difficult to catch up at this point. And it's very likely to be bad news for the rest of their academic development going forward. But in an unschooling context,
the way they describe like learning how to read was just kind of having no interest in it. One day, like picking up a book like about horses, and they were into horses, right? And then being like, okay, I'm just gonna read this book because I really want to read this book. And then within like an hour or 2 hours, like learning how to read. And for me, I was like, wait, that's possible?
I think that would shock a lot of people.
Right.
You're saying people just start reading at 12, and it
According
works.
to them. According to them, yes.
So I looked for other accounts of this happening, unschoolers learning to read way later than what's considered normal in school. And these stories are a little hard to find, but they do exist. Now, it doesn't usually take 2 hours. From what I've seen, something like 2 months sounds more typical, but still, 2 months. This seems to be a real thing, that away from the pressures and the guilt and the pathologizing of school, older kids can reach so-called grade-level reading skills and beyond remarkably quickly, all without being explicitly taught.
Yeah, but I mean, it also makes sense. It's like when you really have a desire and like a need to learn something, whatever it is in your life, and it's coming from you, then there may be even steps that you need to take in order to get there, like sort of incremental steps. But you're gonna figure that out, if you want the thing enough. You know what I mean? So I think that is like a huge misconception about learning, and I think learning can happen in so many different ways that I think we're just starting to be open to, because we've had this sort of fixed mindset around like what it looks like for so long, right?
Now, you might say, what if somebody doesn't want to learn to read? The short answer is that unschoolers tend to believe that school itself is the reason many kids don't like reading. But we'll revisit a broader version of that question later. For now, let's move away from talking about this in the abstract and start getting concrete. Let's dive into the specifics of what leaving school was like for Sierra.
So once you left, what was it like on a day-to-day basis?
So I went through a lot of different phases and tried a lot of different things. The first 2 years were what you might call like deschooling.
Real quick, deschooling is not just another word for unschooling. In unschooling circles, it specifically refers to the period of time after leaving conventional school where it's expected that children will need time to decompress and release the pressures and the negative associations built up from years of school.
So actually like no curriculum, no workbooks, no like formal sit down and learn a thing. It was stay at home with my dad. My dad was building a house at the time, learning like construction and like helping out with that, like running around in the woods, like identifying mushrooms. I was like super into that at that time, and like playing, like going to the library and reading tons of books and just like kind of like playing and doing what I wanted. So that was the first 2 years. After that, there was sort of more pressure to keep up with everyone else my age in terms of like academics, right? And so I did end up doing like a correspondence program for some number of years, where I just had like a remote teacher and he would send me like stuff and I would send it back. And that was good. I enjoyed it. It didn't take a lot of my time and it was fun. I really liked that teacher. And I had all the flexibility that I wanted. It was just a matter of like taking some time during the day and doing the schoolwork. And then after that, in like my high school years, I did a similar thing, although without a teacher. It was just a kind of a curriculum that I like uploaded onto my computer. The internet wasn't so useful back then. And so I just worked through that kind of on my like downtime, basically. So it was like probably took up about 10 or 15% of my time doing schoolwork, and then the rest of my time I could travel, I could start a business, I could play, I could rock climb, I could do whatever I wanted.
Did you catch that? She said academic work took about 10 to 15% of her time. And that felt low to me. I used to be a teacher, and a really common feeling among teachers is that there's so much curriculum to get through and so little time to cover it all. So I was curious.
Were you leaving a bunch of stuff out, or is it somehow more efficient to do it on your own?
For me, it was just like easy and efficient to do it on my own, because it was like I was doing it because I wanted to. So it was like I wasn't, procrastinating. I just like sat down, did it. Honestly, I feel like in school, of course, I haven't been in school in a super long time, so maybe things have changed. I've not been in school in a really long time, but it just seemed to me like the small bits that I was in school, it was like the curriculum for the next year is basically the same thing as the last year with like some more details like added in.
There's something you said earlier. You learned the academic things because you wanted to. Do you think you were able to unschool because you happen to have this desire to do academic work, and maybe there's other types of kids who don't want to do it, and so unschooling wouldn't work for them? What do you think about that?
Great question. So I think that there are people out there who are less inclined to doing academic work than probably I was as a kid. And that doesn't mean that unschooling isn't for them, because I actually going, like, if I like look back and think about, okay, I'm 10 years old again, I just quit school, like, what would I do anything differently? And I think that if I'd thrown out the entire idea of like keeping up with my schoolwork and sort of following a curriculum, I think I would have been just fine. Like, I don't think that was sort of like an essential part of my education. And I think for folks who decide to unschool and who don't have any sort of academic leanings that way, in a specific way, I think they're going to learn what they need to learn to do what they want to do regardless.
Well, let me ask you this: do you think anything needs to be mandatory? Does any class need to be mandatory? Do we need to make sure every kid learns a certain set of things, or should everything be optional?
Everything.
Everything should be optional.
I think if anything is not optional, then you have a coercive system that then is actually unhealthy.
That might have taken you off guard, but it's a sentiment I've heard before in the unschooling world. The idea goes something like this. One of the fundamental problems with school as we know it is that it's compulsory. It's mandatory. It's non-consensual. And not only is that ethically questionable, but the tension involved often gets in the way of learning. Remember, unschoolers tend to believe that children don't need to be taught how to learn and that they're capable of deciding for themselves what's important to learn just by observing the world around them. So if that's your starting point, and you look around and you see all these adults trying to intervene in that process and call the shots, even if those adults are acting out of concern and compassion, then to you maybe it just seems patronizing?
Are you saying that the act of saying children must learn this and we have to make them learn it, whether they want to or not, is an act of mistrust and disrespect, and it's inhumane?
I do. And I realize that that's like a pretty strong like stance. What I'm talking about is not the people. It's not the teachers. It's not even the administrators. I think that everyone at all levels are a victim of this system. It's really not even a system. It's a mindset. It's a culture around like how we think we need to treat people for them to become good citizens or good human beings.
The mindset and culture that Sierra is talking about might sound kind of strange to you, so let me see if I can make it clearer with an analogy. Throughout much of history, corporal punishment was super common. It's still pretty common in some places, but it used to be so normalized that people thought it was necessary. Like, you need to paddle your child when they misbehave, otherwise they will grow up to be a criminal. And if they do end up being a criminal, then we need to give them a good flogging in the town square. This stuff really wasn't criticized for a long time. And even today, you see parenting advice that's not so much you shouldn't spank your child as much as it is you need to spank your child the right way. Similarly, almost all of the discourse around education today is about how we should be directing the learning of young people. What's the best way to get kids to reach the goals that we set for them? And there's very little talk about whether we adults should be forcibly setting those goals in the first place.
We still have a kind of like a mindset that if you don't like yell at your kid, or you don't force them, or like, you know, like manipulate them into like doing something,
incentivizing them with grades.
Incentivizing with the grades, or like, yeah, with rewards or candy or whatever it is, then they're not going to grow up to being a fully functional or like good human being. And I know in my body and my bones that that is not true.
This opens up a ton of interesting questions about school, about being a parent, and most of that is way outside the scope of this video, but I did ask Sierra what she thinks public schools would look like in a more ideal world. And she told me that they should basically be like public libraries, where people of all ages are welcome to use resources and make connections, offer and take classes if they want to. Libraries already exist, and many of them are already excellent institutions of learning. So this isn't too hard to imagine, but...
Of course, the culture would have to change with it, right? It's not just a matter of being like, oh, like, schools are now just like open for if you want to come or if you don't, and totally consent based. But because I mean, we ourselves have school within us, right? We have our expectations of ourselves, our pressure that we put on ourselves. But like I saw some of the videos that you have on TikTok last night, and like, has school fucks with your brain? Like, literally those things are like in our brains. Like, yeah, like we have those. So I think there's the structure. I think the many things could structurally be changed for the better in public school systems, and I don't think it would be enough without, you know, also a cultural change.
So all these ideas, all this unschooling philosophy, it might be interesting to think about, but it's not worth much if it doesn't actually work, right? So can unschooling actually prepare someone for adult life? Can you find work as an unschooler? It might surprise you to hear that Sierra technically got a high school diploma and so was able to go to university.
I did get a high school diploma because I wanted to try out university. So I went to like a local high school counselor, and kind of did like an interview with him, and he was kind enough to translate sort of my life experiences and the curriculum that I had done into like a formal high school transcript so I could go into university. And so I did go to university for 1 year and then walked out from there also. And yeah, I was glad for the experience. Wasn't for me.
You say university wasn't for you. Some people might think you tried university and you weren't prepared for it and it was just awful experience. You were not ready to do any of the work. Is that true?
That's a great question. And when I say it wasn't for me at the time. I'll just say a little bit about my experience in university. It was really interesting. For the first time in a long time, I like sat down in a class and there was a professor who was telling me what I needed to learn to pass the test or whatever it was. And I was able to sit down with my notebook, take notes, absorb the information, and then go and pass the test. It was not like a complicated thing. So that was like the easy part of the experience. Almost luxurious because I didn't have to like seek out the information on my own. But yeah, it was similar stuff that made me feel like it wasn't for me as how I felt when I was leaving elementary school. It's just kind of like the behemoth nature of like this bureaucratic like system sort of entrenched in its own mechanisms. You know, I had big class sizes. It was very impersonal. You know, it was a school of like probably 30,000 people. And so, yeah, I felt like I was like a cog or like a number. If there comes a day where I really, really want to learn a thing that I can only access through formal higher education, then I'm absolutely going to do that. Like, I'm not against it. I think there's huge value in it for if that's what you want and that's what you need in your life. But where I was at that time, you know, I had other things to do, and it wasn't serving me really in what I needed.
So despite being able to get into university as an unschooler and being able to keep up with the academic demands, Sierra decided not to get a college degree. So at this point, you might have the same question that a member of my audience asked in a comment.
I'm going to read this the way was phrased by the person who asked it, but feel free to interpret it however it makes sense.
Okay.
Did you have trouble starting out in the professional world?
Did I have trouble starting out in the professional world? I have to think about how I'll approach that one. I'm not sure what the professional world is.
Yeah. If I were to try to guess where this person was coming from, it's the big story that you got to go to school, get your diploma, get your degrees, so that you can get a good job. And there's this, you know, if you don't have those diplomas or degrees, then how can you get a good job?
Yeah, so I feel I've always felt sort of pretty strongly about like getting the job is not the goal. Getting a job is not the goal. Kind of one of my core values is as probably you could tell, like is freedom and like being able to do what I want when I want. So the idea of actually like having a job and having an employer that tells me what to do when, and having to show up at a job every morning and like set an alarm every morning, like just sounds horrible to me. Like I've tried pretty much to avoid that my entire life. I've definitely leaned towards like entrepreneurial pursuits when it comes to actually making money, because you do actually need money to live, unfortunately, or at least some. So like two things. One thing that I've really focused on is, finding creative ways of like starting my own businesses. So there's that. And then the other piece that I've really, really focused on is not how can I make more money, but how can I spend less money and still have a comfortable life and do what I want. Really kind of rejecting the idea of consumption as a way to happiness. I think it's really destructive, not only for ourselves, but also for the planet. So that's kind of been my game. I enjoy the game. I understand that it's not for everyone, but I really love it. I've never felt like, oh no, I have to like go get a job because I'm running out of money. So I try not to get myself to that point, because like I said, like I really value my freedom, and I know like it's not equal for everyone. I have, you know, many opportunities that other people don't have. One is that I don't live in a city, so that makes it actually a lot easier.
Okay, so let's take that professional world question and sort of flip it.
Okay.
Has unschooling made it easier for you to build a life for yourself without having to rely on the professional world?
I would say so. Yeah, because I was unschooled, because I didn't go to school, I started my own business and like a partnership in business with my parents when I was 11. And so that sort of practice, I mean, that opportunity, not even practice, that opportunity to actually be like a full equal partner as an adult would be in an actual legitimate business. Since I was 11, I've been learning how to interact with customers, how to deal with marketing, how to make sure you have a quality product so your customers come back, and how to like work in partnership with other people in a business, and like so many things that, because I didn't go to school, I had the opportunity of learning those things from when I was quite young.
Yeah, I certainly can't think of any typical school class that would teach anyone those things.
No, and the cool thing is was that I didn't have to get like taught it, right? As a young person, it was just what I was doing, and I was contributing to my family. Like I was a part of my family's business and contributing to like our like collective well-being. I felt like a respected member of that collective, and so the learning was sort of a byproduct, right?
Sounds like being a small business partner as a preteen would be useful experience for anyone who wants to make a living without relying on an employer. Now, I know there's more to being prepared for adulthood than knowing how to make money, but before we drop this topic, let's get specific. What sorts of things does Sierra do for work?
Like consulting work and like odd kind of on the side, making websites for people and finding like whatever it is like that's coming up in my world and my friends or my community that like they need help with, and kind of like finding ways to help out with that, and then sometimes getting paid for it. It's a complex mixture. Right now, what I'm doing for work, what I'm getting up and doing every day is I'm building a really cool little wooden like small house in the woods.
You're the second unschooler I've talked to who is building their own house. So I don't know what that says. I don't know how common that is for people who don't unschool to build their own house, but...
That's cool.
I didn't ask Sierra how she's monetizing that house construction project, or whether she's monetizing it at all. At that point in the conversation, I was getting more interested in the non-monetary questions, especially since she told me that some of her work involves bringing the unschooling philosophy to others.
I would call it more of like a passion than a career. So envision, like instead of a school, one thing that I keep hearing from young people in my life is that they hate school, but they love school because of the friends, right? They want to spend time with their friends. That's what they want to go to school for. But then all the other stuff that they have to do at school, they hate. So envision a few families coming together, all with sort of the same idea of like not wanting to go back to school, but wanting to create this really awesome learning environment where people can have friends, can do stuff with their friends, do the things that they actually want to do with their friends all day long, as much as they want. So there's more and more people around the world that are doing this, smaller groups of people learning together in really awesome, fun, and joyful ways. So that's part of what I do, is supporting people in that process. Partly it's like telling my own story, like, it's possible to do it. Your kids aren't gonna like be ruined. And I'm also a learning facilitator, self-directed education facilitator. So I've worked in some of these like micro schools or learning centers.
The kinds of micro schools and learning centers that Sierra is talking about are similar to unschooling in that they all exist under the umbrella of self-directed education, which is to say they share the philosophy that learners of all ages should be free to take charge of their own learning. There's actually a whole world of micro schools and democratic schools and learning centers that's worth exploring, but I'll save that for another video. Now, I know for some of you, your gut reaction is that maybe these alternative schools might be a scam, and maybe Sierra is only making them sound good for the sake of her own financial interest. And that is a healthy dose of skepticism. I will say that in the hour I spent talking to Sierra, I didn't get the sense that she was trying to sell snake oil. In fact, she brought up her own negative experiences with unschooling without me even having to ask.
I'm not going to say it's easy to choose something different, especially given the world we live in and the expectations of like, you want to make your family proud. Like that's totally normal and natural. A majority of my family is sort of very academically oriented. There's a lot of like PhDs, a lot of like people who have really pursued like higher education and gone through with it. And that's great. I admire that. And also, it's made it sort of a little extra difficult for me to choose a different path and not feel like I've got some people kind of giving me the side eye,
Sounds like to be an unschooler, you have to be willing and able to withstand the scrutiny that comes with going against the social norm of going to school. And in that sense, it's not for everyone. There are people who just don't want to go against the norm, and others who may lack the support to be able to do so.
I think a huge part of it is like no one learns in isolation, right? And that's one other common misconception is like unschooling or self-directed education or homeschooling. It's like you in a room by yourself learning a thing by yourself. Like, no. People don't learn in isolation. People learn through relationships. People learn in community. People learn from their environment. And I think it would be very, very challenging for someone to have a really rich and nourishing learning experience unless they have at least some support from parents, guardians, community members, family, someone in their life who can accompany them in that journey and give them the space to do it.
And that's something I want to emphasize too. One of the criticisms I've heard is that unschooling is this callous form of rugged individualism where kids are just removed from school and left to fend for themselves. But after talking to Sierra, I think the opposite is true. Maybe school is what's callous and overly individualistic, because a student's top priority, in theory, is their own grade, part of what often feels like a zero-sum competition over who gets the best future. Whereas unschooling involves immersing young people in their communities, preparing kids for adult life by allowing them close proximity to adult life, supporting them as they make decisions and take risks in the real world. And as much as Sierra values her own freedom and autonomy, I didn't get the sense that prioritizing those individualist values in her education made her especially self-centered. Listen to how she responded when I asked her about her own happiness.
How happy are you, and would you change anything?
Like right now in my life. So I'm pretty happy. I mean, I have down days like everyone else, but I have like such a blessed and incredible life. Sometimes, yeah, it's like the moments where I feel like it's not like a bad like depression or like anything like that, but the days where I feel like I feel sad and I feel down, which I think is actually really appropriate in the times we're living in to feel these things. You know, some of that has to do with, you know, what is my responsibility with like the incredible life and privilege that I do have and the freedom that I have, really. And knowing that how much suffering there is out there and how much work there is to do in the world to make the world a better place. Sometimes I definitely feel responsibility and you know, it comes from a place of feeling like incredibly lucky and blessed and appreciative for what I do have.
Speaking of that sense of responsibility, Sierra is also a co-founder of Education in Transformation, or EDIT, an initiative creating media broadly centered around self-directed education. They've got a YouTube channel, a bilingual podcast, blog posts. Some of Sierra's more recent videos highlight stories I was previously unaware of, from democratic learning communities in Egypt to children in an overcrowded refugee camp in Greece. If you want to learn more about the broader worldwide movement of self-directed education, definitely check out EDIT's YouTube channel. I'll put a link in the description. And if you're interested in unschooling specifically...
Do you have any advice for students or parents who might be thinking about unschooling?
Yeah, lots of it. But the number one thing is, I think, trust yourself and trust each other. If you just really go for it and you really sort of honor yourself and your own needs and like feel into what feels right and what doesn't feel right and be willing to be flexible and adaptable with that, with yourself and the people around you, you can't really go wrong.
And I think that's a good note to end on. If you've made it this far in the video, thank you for sticking with me. This is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to self-directed education. This video is part of a series where I interview grown unschoolers to see how their radical approach to education has worked out for them. And there's more of that to come, so keep an eye on this channel over the coming months if that's something you want to see more of. I want to thank Sierra for taking the time to talk to me, and special thanks to Maya Landers, the creator of grownunschoolers.com, the website where I found Sierra. You can read more about Sierra and a bunch of other grown unschoolers at grownunschoolers.com. Thank you for watching.
I actually helped start a little school here in Costa Rica about 11 years ago. So that was my first experience sort of facilitating.
And I feel like education is doomed to fail if you don't respect the people you're trying to educate.